Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Association for Contract Packagers and Manufacturers webinar, separating fact from fiction on some compostable packaging options. Today's session is titled, Is Compostable Pouch the Right Package for You? Today's session will dig a little deeper into the compostable world and the options for packaging. Advancements in compostable flexible pouches as a packaging option are poised to alleviate the stresses and support the packaging industry with growing calls for sustainability. Maybe more importantly, we'll take a look at what might be expected for the future. So this afternoon, I'm pleased to be your moderator. I am Ron Puvak, the Executive Director of the Contract Packaging Association. And just give you a quick overview what CPA, the Contract Association for Contract Packagers and Manufacturers, is all about. We basically are the industry's voice. We do a lot of education, networking. We are also a lead generation tool for many of our members through our RFQ tool. We attend trade shows and conferences. We are the promoter of contract packaging and contract manufacturing in the United States and North America continent. And we have a strong relationship with the European Contract Packaging Association. This fall, CPA will be at two trade shows, Natural Products Expo in Philadelphia, September 22nd through 25th, and then at Pack Expo Las Vegas, September 27th through 29th. If you're attending these shows, please stop by and visit with us. We've also begun the promotion of our event called Engage. Next slide, thank you. Engage is now the name of our annual event, Contract Packaging and Manufacturing Experience. It will occur on March 1st through the 3rd in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Save that date, we'll have a lot more information coming your way soon. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in mute. At the end of the session today, a brief survey will come your way. Please provide us with your feedback. It's always important. The entire webinar is going to be recorded. Within a day or two, we'll have an email link to you can see the recorded session. There's also going to be a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. Please enter your questions via the question function on your screen. So let's get started. Today's topic will be delivered by Todd Meussling, Fresh Lock Senior Manager Market Development. Todd is the Fresh Lock Senior Manager Market Development, and the Fresh Lock brand is the market leader in press to close zipper and track and slider reclosable solutions for flexible packaging. Fresh Lock products are designed and produced by Presto Products at Business Reynolds Consumer Packaging. Todd, it's my pleasure to introduce you. Please take it away.
August 16, 1858, a telegraph was shared between President James Buchanan and Queen Victoria of England. The Queen expressed hope for an additional link between the nations whose friendship is founded on their common interests and reciprocal esteem. That link referred to the new transatlantic cable for overseas communications that had just been installed. Now, if you and I were alive in that period and talking about stringing a cable 2,000 miles under sail across ocean currents, weather, and sea monsters so that we could communicate, we probably would have said, it'll never work. Times have, of course, changed, but our ability to take on challenges for worthy goals have not. Today, you've joined me here for a discussion about flexible pouches made essentially from plants, designed to package a host of products that require protection, preservation, and then returning those packages back to the soil at the end of their life. Why should we probably take this even remotely seriously? It's crazy. Why are you even here? The good news is that we're much further along with compostable packaging. And the question now, however, is it time for you to consider compostables in your packaging program? Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm Todd Meussling with Fresh Lock, and we're the manufacturer of slider and press-to-close zipper closures for your flexible pouches. Today, I'd like to provide you with a broad overview of what we're seeing in our journey in the area of compostables for pouches in the marketplace. So why are we doing this? The conversations with compostables starts with options available to us as we move from the linear packaging model to a circular one. Most of us are in a different place in our sustainable efforts than we were 10 or even 5 years ago. We've either developed goals for sustainability and carbon reduction, or we're certainly in the process of creating them. Many are targeted for 2025, 4 short years away. The contract packager challenge is that you're driven by the customer, and packaging is just one of the many challenges that you have to bring value in. But in packaging, you're probably being faced with customers and prospects asking for different solutions, and they want them soon. They're leaning in on you to help them meet their sustainability objectives. If you've been on this journey with your own packaging program, you certainly know that some changes are easier to talk about than to accomplish. Not everything we want to achieve in our packaging objectives is going to fit cleanly into our current process. For example, we're big believers in recyclable materials as being an essential path to packaging circularity. Recovery of valuable resource for secondary life and eliminating waste is a critical part of the system. But for many applications, mono-material recyclables for flexibles is working very well. It's the right path. Other product applications, however, may be suited for a compostable alternative. So what are some of our considerations for compostables as a flexible option for your product? Another popular model that I've seen some changes to lately is the waste management hierarchy. The hierarchy is pretty much the same in that source reduction and reuse continues to be paramount. You're being challenged right now to do more with less, to take what you have and take material out. This has been a major incentive for the conversion of rigid materials to flexible packaging. What's interesting is that as compostable material technologies evolve and expand more into flexibles, their value is also increasing for many applications. Globally, there is roughly 300 million metric tons of plastic being produced, and about 16% of that is being collected from mechanical recycling. Of that, about 12% is actually being recycled. Recycled materials definitely have the greatest value potential because they allow us to reuse materials, but only if materials are properly recycled and sourced. Compostables are increasing in value because some packagers see compostables as an alternative to plastics that don't make it to proper recovery, and they end up being waste. As a general description of the plant-based compounds, this chart shows generally how compostable bioplastics are made and utilized in the system. And one thing we learned very early is that the process of turning a plant into plastic and using the plastic and then providing the correct environment for composting so that the biodegradation occurs within a manageable time frame is a shift from the traditional approach of petrochemicals. It's a fascinating process, and we could spend hours getting into the science alone. The takeaway for you today is that the expertise is available if you need it. I've been very fortunate to be able to reach out to a lot of knowledgeable resources on this topic, and I know many of them would be great at helping you as well. The contract packager needs knowledge as an ally in sustainability. And after all, you are expected to have all the answers, right? One recommendation I have is to fortify yourself with enough knowledge of compostables that you'll understand where packaging opportunities as well as watchouts are for your company as an opportunity comes around. Note that we're also using the term compostable packaging versus other forms of biodegradability. That means our pouch will break down under combined conditions of heat, moisture, oxygen, and the presence of microorganisms. We're not saying it will degrade in a landfill or in the ocean, etc. These are common misconceptions, and it's important that everyone understands that there are differences. It's also important to note that we're not promoting the use of additives or oxo-degradables to force material to break down into smaller materials. A big plus for compostables is that plants are great for reducing carbon from the atmosphere. We will generate carbon and greenhouse gas emissions in the agriculture, extraction, and processing aspects of creating a package, but the intention is for there to be a beneficial carbon offset compared to traditional petrochemicals. Plant-based plastics utilize renewable biomass sources, which may include oils, sugarcane, dent corn, and hemp. Expanding on this, bio-based materials may come from both plant-based as well as fossil-based sources, and a compostable plastics may be created from a mixture of both of those. It's a foregone conclusion that paper is a material that could be used for both compostables and also recycling, depending on how it's treated. This graph here is a good one because it shows some of the things that are being done and how we approach it from a bio-based standpoint or a fossil-based standpoint. Note that the graph pertains to plastics, and that the takeaway here is an understanding that bio-based materials can be biodegradable or non-biodegradable, just as some fossil-based materials can be part of a compostable structure. And in my view, this is where some of the magic can happen. Here's where the term biocompounding comes in. Take a look at PBAT, for example. Polybutyrate is tough, it's flexible, it's got good elongation. My product needs that. Can I capture some of these properties as well as those from bio-based components to increase the renewable aspects? So we expect to see continued advancements in material options due to biocompounding. You may find now that some of the barrier properties you're looking for, some of the thicknesses that you're looking for when it comes to your introduction to compostables may not be there. Don't dismiss it, because more materials are starting to emerge and they're starting to be blended with some of these others, and that's where we'll see it evolve. For contract packagers, note that not all materials perform the same with each other. So one thing that is a watch out with petrochemicals, I may use polyester, I may use nylon, I may use paper on the outer structure, outer part of a structure, but my sealant films are generally something that I can count on and rely on over the years. They're generally some type of a polyethylene-based material. However, when it comes to compostables, not all of these materials are compatible with each other. So one watch out is to make sure as you're looking at compostable materials, make sure it's something that you are have tried and vetted out properly. So now let's take a look at the signals of growth in compostable packaging. The demand for compostables is expected to increase upwards near 20% year over year. And what's driving the growth is particularly one variable that comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation commitments that packaging can be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. So there's three areas that they want to attack, and brands are taking a look at those areas as they establish their own sustainability goals. Downstream of these commitments are companies that realize that if they can't get there from reduction and they can't get there from recyclables, compostables may be a place to look. According to DataBridge market research, we expect the momentum to continue in this area past 2007. This will require expansion on the material side as well as the technologies from new materials to emerge as development continues. Organic Waste Services, who is a data interpretation agency, conducts testings, and they indicate that if all the work that they're seeing right now, once it comes to critical mass, there will definitely be an impact of compostable packaging in the marketplace. This could certainly turn up the volume on the topic with your customers. This is where your phone may start ringing. So what's happening with the brands? Support from CPGs. We got an announcement earlier this year that Mars and Wrigley is taking Skittles to compostable packaging. We also know that we've heard similar goals and announcements from companies like PepsiCo, KFC, Unilever, Danone. How will this marketplace grow? We believe that food service, municipalities, activities from companies like KFC and McDonald's to make all their packaging or many of their products compostable so that they can be captured in that same location, their restaurant, an airport. Those will be the initial areas where recovery and volume of compostables will come from. As that expansion continues, we think that more and more communities will start to pick it up, and that eventually you're going to see more and more brands put their foot into the water through things like brand extensions or packaging transitions from rigid to flexible packaging. And they're going to get support from retailers and NGOs. If you take a look at just two major retailers like Target and Walmart, they specifically call out compostable materials as something that they will accept as part of their own sustainability goals. And finally, if we don't do anything on our own, we know that eventually this is going to become more than just a volunteer type effort. Food waste diversion laws or organic banning laws are emerging as we continue to see that 40% of our food is being wasted in one form or another. Composting will most likely benefit by these laws. And the dirty little secret, and maybe that's the right term, the dirty little secret is that composters don't necessarily want your packaging, but they want the food that's left in the package. They want the residual oils, the leftover mixes, and the lettuce scraps. They'll take the food waste that recyclers can't. Cultivating organic matter through the promotion of sustainable technologies, sustainable techniques, my apologies, or the Compost Act was introduced in July and designed to treat composting as a conservation effort and accelerate national efforts to improve composting support and infrastructure. In the US, several states, Maine, Oregon, etc., are making advancements on EPR packaging programs and bills that require producers of products and packaging to pay to manage materials at the end of life, as well as to design more sustainable packaging. So EPR is something that is much more prominent in Europe, but we're starting to see it emerge now in the US. And what will happen is that the brand or the high end of the food chain, the manufacturer of the food chain, is going to be expected to pay for proper recovery and disposal. The Zero Waste Food Act is one to keep an eye on. So what does all this mean for contract packagers? What will you say when the phone rings and the customer at the other end asks about compostable packaging for their product? There are several considerations that you'll need to factor in as you prepare that response. Some of them are actually easy because as a contract packager, you're not all packaging something, a category of product that lends itself to food. And ideally, a food contact type application is what we're looking for. Does the product leave a residue or that makes the package difficult to clean? Is the product soil safe? Do I have to worry about a floor cleaner, for example, would be a bad choice for compostable packaging because of the residual that might be introduced to the soil during soil destabilization. And is the product a short shelf life? Right now, barriers are kind of on the low end for a lot of compostable packages. So if I have something that's going to require an extra long shelf life, that may not be a good fit for me. What are my operational considerations? How will this type of change or introduction impact my business? Part of it may be how you source materials. You'll find that there's a whole new category of suppliers and players out there that work in the compostable environment. And specifically important to the contract packager is, are these costs something that I can pass through? And then, of course, how will these materials impact my machines, my productivity? And then finally, what type of testing factors do I need to be concerned with? My process considerations, focusing in a little bit more on the machines, is that do I currently have success running a mono material on my packaging line? Many of the reasons people are looking at compostable materials is because they're being challenged by all PE type structures and the operating window they have in order to make a pouch. Are there heat and processing challenges that I can't overcome? And would I find that a lower temperature, operating temperature, would be a benefit to my overall program? And then another consideration to look at is what are my customers' prime prospects looking for? So I'm kind of having to jump over the brand, the customer that I'm dealing with, and get into the psyche of who they're selling it to. Is the compostability aspect of something convenient or easy for their shopper? And will their consumers pay for the change to a compostable pouch? These are all factors that you should weigh as you're making your decision on whether compostable packaging is something you should introduce to your program. So here's a little exercise on how you might want to look at compostable versus recyclable. And this is obviously a semi-rigid application, but which would you choose here? Recyclable or compostable packaging? And the K-cup case is something that we get multiple answers on, but it's a fascinating one to look at. So there's over 25 million Keurig and K-cup brewers installed in homes and offices across the United States. So millions more are being sold every year. This results in over 20 billion sales of single-serve coffee pods. Great for consumer convenience, but not for the environment. As the pod packaging was basically ending in landfills, as you can imagine. So the industry knew this was going to be a challenge, and they said you either have to be compostable or recyclable. So which path do you think would be the right one and why? And there's two ways to look at it. Somebody who is a proponent of recycling could look at this and they say it's a slam dunk. Recycling's available. Let's just make the bottom recyclable and the top into some type of a monolayer. The compostable guy says, well, wait a second now. You know, if they're buying this product for convenience, are we expecting the consumer to get done making their coffee and then tearing open the lid, dumping out the coffee grounds that are in there so that they can clean out the package and then put it into their recycling bin? And the answer is that that's an expectation that they can't rely on, which means it'll end up in the landfill. So in this situation, compostability, remember, those composters want the food. They don't necessarily care so much about the package, but this would lend itself great for composting if the infrastructure was in place for the consumer to know what to do with it. Here's another chart that I like a lot when I take a look at it from a flexible standpoint. So if I take a look at all these factors in the center, from how I get my feedstock and the product protection aspects, storage, branding, cost, all those different things, a lot of people would say, well, this is really easy. It should all go to recyclable. Most of these petrochemicals are much cheaper than compostables. I don't have to worry about certification. The feedstock's readily available, and I know that I can get maximum storage out of the product. But if we change the lens on it, we can go back to one of our initial objectives from a circular economy. It's like, do we really want a pouch of potato chips where the chips are eaten within a 30-day period, but then the pouch could last 50 or 60 years? And the question becomes, what if our focus is to right-size the package? We don't necessarily want something that's going to last for a long, long time. We want something that's going to last for as long as it needs to in order to fulfill its service, in order to be able to provide the need that we want for that product. Compostable certification is another thing that comes up, and it gets to be where the web becomes a little bit tangled for many. And so the question becomes is why is it important to certify? And the fear is that you know, Composting means that I've got to have a product that a composter can reliably use to put it in their process, and either after 90 days for industrial composting, it will give that composter the assurance that then they can take that product, that compost, package it and sell it commercially or from a retail standpoint as a valued product. The last thing they want is to have a big compost heap that's full of plastic forks that didn't compost. So certification, one of the things that does is that helps to establish and certify that the package that you're running has met the criteria. It's a green mark, if you will. It helps to eliminate the green washing that could take place where somebody says, well, sure, mine's compostable and it's really not. And we need those things in order to build the infrastructure up. And there's a couple different levels of resources as you go through the certification process. The first one is really, if you're interested in getting a product certified, to reach out to a certification entity like BPI or TUV in Canada. For those of you in Canada, BNQ. And what they will do is they will help to guide you through the process. But they actually utilize consulting services like an OWS or Dinserco. These are companies that are data collectors, and they look at all the data, they look at what you're doing for a package, and they help to guide you in terms of whether that data will meet the criteria for certification. But sometimes, especially now, we don't really have the answers. The consulting services says what you're doing there we haven't seen before, so we need to have that tested further. And so that's when they'll go to a lab and actually where the rubber meets the road, where they will break down the materials, and then the labs will supply that data to the consulting services who will interpret it for certification. A little bit bureaucratic, I admit, that how it looks on the outside, but they all do serve a really strong purpose. If you want to learn more, and of course, education is the key to something like compost packaging, there are several resources that you can utilize, not only in North America through the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, but also in Europe, the European Bioplastics. So I encourage you to look at all those sources. And one thing that was interesting is I interviewed about 6 or 7 representatives from different companies, different parts of the food chain as I was preparing this and getting some of the information. And I asked the same question to everybody, and that is, what's a final recommendation you would have to a contract packager, to a brand, somebody who's exploring compostable packaging? And these are some of the comments that they listed out. And granted, they all are a little biased in their own way because they're supportive of compostable packaging. But I think it's really interesting to pick out some of these and just take a look at what they mean. Is especially next to last when they're saying, you know, they're developing many things. If nothing else, keep an eye on it because you're going to find that it's going to actually be a very viable alternative. And I'd also really like to acknowledge some of the presentation contributors like the people that I talked to and have worked with as we've gone through our journey to get to work on a closure that will work with a compostable package. And these are companies like the BPI Institute. Eagle Flexible Packaging is a good pouch converter who worked with us on a variety of materials. And then Fudamora and OWS both work very closely in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Todd. Really, very much appreciate the information and the data. I got a few questions. Looks like they're popping up here, and if you don't mind, we're going to take a few minutes and go through them.
Sure.
One of the big things you were talking recycling and compostability, composting, things like that. The current waste stream is, you know, one basket, and we put everything in there thinking it's recyclable. How, in your current state of the industry, how bad do you think compostable will be for current recycling materials and streams? Do we have a good way to pull them apart? We know that PLA in a PET bale is not a good thing. Or do we have the same thing with films and flexible packaging?
Yeah, and if I understand the question correctly, it sounds like this kind of goes to infrastructure and recovery. And we'll be the first ones to admit is that on the compostable side, it's very weak. We find that there's a couple things going on. First of all, the consumer education part. Um, when they get a compostable package, do they even know that it's a compostable package they're receiving? Are they going to put that in the garbage, or are they going to put that in recycling and contaminate that recovery stream? The second one is that even if once we get to the point where we're addressing compostability so that the consumer kind of gets it and we're starting to get the messaging out there, will the recovery be there so that there's an avenue for them to be able to put that package? We think that's going to be addressed a couple different ways. And one company I talked to gave me a great adage, and they said, how many airports were there when the first airplanes were created? It's you need the mass of materials out there in order to justify the infrastructure, and you need the infrastructure in order to be able to carry the mass. So we see that those things are going to slowly evolve and balance off each other over a period of time. Now, legislation like the Compost Act that I mentioned, and some of these goals is that the brands and the retailers and the restaurants, those food service types of things are going to what I believe will prime the pump for that. But we do have challenges. Compostable packaging is not designed to compost in a landfill, so that environment doesn't work. Right now, what we're looking to do is to establish that path as an alternative to recycling and an alternative for a sustainability goal.
Okay. One of the things you mentioned earlier on is that short shelf life is kind of where compostable packaging is today. Are there developments on barrier layers to make compostables more, prone to longer shelf lives? Is there work in that? And, what's the issues or technical hurdles that we got to face on those ones?
Yeah, well, a lot of it, it's a great question. A lot of it becomes, what the product's needs are. And, a lot of people are going to say, well, I'm in some type of a bakery product. And in that bakery product, I'm using a metallized material and I'm getting the barrier benefit out of that. And that's great. But how many times have we stepped back and said, do I really need to be in this because that's what I need for the product? Or is that just what I'm using because it's got a good graphic appeal, or it's because that's what many other people that I see in that space using? So, one thing that they're going to have to start off with doing is to measure the product against the packaging and make sure that you're right sized. The other thing is that I'm seeing materials with good barrier coatings, like aluminum oxide, for example, being applied to these compostable materials in order to help beef up the barrier. And I expect to see that more in combination with more emerging materials, like I mentioned earlier, where if there's a certain property I want, can I design something that is stronger in that particular property?
So if you were, again, one of your last points there about, start small, whatever, what would be the sweet spot for compostable packaging today? If people listening, or working with products today, what would be the sweet spot to say, let's make that conversion?
Yeah, it's a great question. So right now we're seeing a lot of interest in some obvious markets, produce, where if a product starts from the soil, why not put it back in the soil, right? So if it's contaminated, if your lettuce bag or something like that is contaminated with lettuce, that would probably be a great place. We're also finding things where food products where it sticks, adheres. So if I think of the requirements of how to recycle, for example, they want those packages clean. So products that are, dry, free-flowing products, crumbly granolas, for example, those probably lend themselves better to recyclables. But to have the expectation that the consumer is going to take that extra moment of time each day to clean that package out, what they normally threw away, and now clean it out so they can put it in recycling, that's where you should take a look at it. Things that leave residuals, fats, oils, all those things are good prospects for composting. Right now, we're getting a lot from, Coffee people are talking. There's oils attached to the coffee, for example. Produce, as I mentioned, teas, herbals, and we're getting a lot of calls from the cannabis industry as well.
Okay. Another one here, you introduced a new term called biocompounding.
Mhm.
Been familiar with that for a few years, but we have to be careful. How would you talk to somebody about the terminology biocompounding that isn't necessarily compostable? Because again, it doesn't. So,
Yeah, and that kind of goes to the point where I showed the chart, Ron, and that is that, you know, I can get fossil-based materials, right, that are do not lend themselves to compost, but it's really a matter of taking a look at the product, talking to your suppliers, and getting an idea of what attributes they can bring to your product while still maintaining that sustainable requirement.
right.
Earlier this year, I attended a seminar, and there were companies emerging out of the woodwork. They were doing things with seaweed. They were doing things with products that I wouldn't even expect, and they're finding ways in order to be able to try to turn them into a some type of an extrudable polymer that could be used for packaging. And that's really where the focus is when I think of biocompounding. It's think of what's coming that doesn't exist now that might be able to provide a benefit.
Okay, great. Um, let's talk about cost. Packaging is all about costs. I take it there's a premium here, you know, and we're not looking for specific numbers, but you know, is this to have warrant a premium? Is it something people can tolerate to go to compostable packaging, and how would they rationalize the additional costs?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think you have to kind of look at it on a unit by unit basis. And this is where part of that discussion with your prospect, when they start to say, "Do you think we could do this in compostable?" I think that's going to be an early discussion point. Is are the economics there? And a couple thoughts. One is that there's no way you can compare this to petrochemicals because the infrastructure of petrochemicals, the sourcing, everything that's been built up over decades is available there, and it's a behemoth. And you're looking at that and comparing that to a price of something where the capacity, the scale is not fully developed yet in some cases, and so we're at the early part of that cycle. So you're going to have a high cost. I think the question is can I benefit from the production of that cost? I've had a couple companies that reached out and they say that they wanted to pursue compostables, and I'll ask them what's driving this. You know, it's going to cost more, and they say, I know it's going to cost more, but I also feel that I can absorb the cost as long as I don't lose in waste, as long as I'm not slowing down my equipment or creating problems someplace else in the packaging. Scale is something like, for example, Mars, the global sustainability expert from Mars was on a seminar and was asked that same question. And he believes that scale is something that will come. We're in an early phase.
Okay. Okay, a couple more here. Certification was a big piece. It's kind of nebulous who is really responsible for the certification. Can you give us your view of like where that's going to fall, who that's going to fall on, who's going to be responsible for that ultimate certification of the materials?
Uh, you got some good questions out here, Ron. From what I'm seeing so far and our journey in it is that there's an initial conversation on, okay, collectively, I've got this brand, I've got a converter, I've got a contract manufacturer, we're all committed to get a package that's going to work. And the cost of getting that certified is really upfront right there. It's on making sure that I've got the right materials in the right thicknesses, in the right combinations with each other that I know will satisfy my product and machinery requirements. And now can I get that certified? Once I'm certified, then that's listed there. It's listed as part of like BPI, as I can go to BPI and I can look at materials that have gotten certified. And so now I have more of a shopping experience here, right? So I can kind of eliminate some of the work because some of that's already been done. Um, the converters that we're working with right now is our objective is to try to get a package for this type of product category, get it certified, and then when the next prospect or brand comes to us, that work is done. We're saying we've already done it, you can use this. And we feel like as more and more products get certified, then there's going to be less of that requirement. As far as whose responsibility, ultimately, the brand is going to decide what they need to put on the package in order for it to be appealing to their customer and to meet their sustainability objectives. And so they're going to have to drive traffic on it.
Okay. I guess there's another question on the side on the certification. Understand the material certification, that sort of thing. But do you see the need to be certifying the end product package combination? Not with full product in it, but with some partial. Do you see that is going to be needed as a certification criteria going forward? And who might have to respond to that?
The end product combination, can you clarify that?
Well, if somebody has some leftover, again, you were talking about one of the desires is in this packaging, the oils or the fats and things like that in there as part of the composting. Will there need to be certification of the total package, not necessarily the material, the product
Yeah.
tag?
So we're doing it two ways, if I'm gathering you right. So right, the first step that we took with the closure is we've got to get component certification, and we're getting toward the end of that journey right now. In fact, we're hopeful that we'll have a fully certified product in the next 45 days. But they're going to say, okay, that's great. That means I can try you, I can use you. But now I got to find out again if I can marry it up to these materials and for this application. And we know that there's going to be a next step as a result to make that package. We feel that once we get past that, that package can be used for a variety of other applications.
Okay. Just on a general sense, how commonly available are the compostable materials today? I mean, can somebody, if they immediately wanted to ramp up a larger scale, is that available, or is there still some supply chain issues that we've still got to face?
Definitely supply chain issues, because if you go back to what I mentioned with the expectations for market growth, you're taking smaller companies who 5 years ago didn't have a lot of attention to their products, and now they're seeing 20%, and the demand is increasing. So they're trying to manage that against what their capacity looks like. We're finding this year that the materials that we needed for our product were generally available. However, we did run into some occasional slowdowns due to component availability. Maybe there was a certain piece that we needed as part of the overall structure that we had a tough time getting a hold of. However, so far they seem to be recovering pretty well. Some of the suppliers we're working with, we may have had to really watch it and communicate with them frequently for about 3 months, but then things started to pick up. Other materials that are going to be very common, they may have a little bit longer of a challenge.
Okay, great. Well, Todd, I think the questions have kind of petered out, and I appreciate that. Again, thanking Todd today for presenting a great presentation and a very timely topic. Again, as part of CPA, we want to thank you all for attending today's session. Please don't forget, we'll be at 2 trade shows coming up in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and our annual event in March, and we'd love seeing you all at any of these events. Again, thanks, Todd. Thank you, Todd, and the team for presenting today, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.